Hello again. Tonight's story is about Juno Keane, a 24-year-old overnight producer at a radio station nobody in the city listens to before midnight, and Delia Roux, the woman who bought that station, hosts the 1 o'clock show and rents Juno the flat directly above the studio. What begins as a lie told to save face in front of an ex slowly becomes an honest question about being heard, being chosen, and loving someone without needing an audience to believe it. The mic was already open. That is the part nobody believed afterward, and the part I have had to explain roughly 400 times since. To the station manager, to my mother's oldest friend, to a woman at the bus stop who recognized my voice and not my face and asked if it was true. It was the 40th anniversary of Radio Halloway. There were 60 people in a building designed for 11. There was a supermarket sheet cake with the station's call letters piped on it in blue, except the icing bag had given out halfway through the 4, so it read like a number that did not exist. And my ex-girlfriend had just told me, warmly, in front of all of them, that she was so glad I had found something small to be good at. So I said I was seeing someone. So Kid asked who. And because the universe has a sense of humor, and I have never had one under pressure, I turned and I kissed the woman standing beside me, a woman who had never once put a hand on anyone without asking first, a woman who signed my hours, a woman who owned the roof over my bed. She kissed me back. She kissed me back for about 4 seconds longer than a lie requires, which does not sound like a long time unless you are standing inside it. And then she let me go and looked at the desk, at the little red bulb that had been faulty for 3 years, and said in the calmest voice I have ever heard a person use, "Mic's still open." Quick note before we begin. If you want the hotter, uncensored version of stories like this, I share them on my Patreon, GL After Hours. The link's in the description for whenever you want to stay a little longer inside the story. Let me back up. The first thing you should know about Radio Halloway is that it should not exist. Halloway is a river city that rains 8 months a year, has 2 bridges and 1 decent bakery, and lost its last newspaper when I was in secondary school. The station lives in a narrow brick building on Farrier Street with a hand-painted sign, a lobby the size of a hallway, and a vending machine that has dispensed nothing but salt and vinegar crisps since the previous decade. Marnie once put in coins for a chocolate bar and got crisps. She put in coins again out of spite and got crisps again. She now refers to it as the machine that knows what you actually want. I was 24 and I produced the overnight show, which meant I arrived at 11:30 at night and left when the bakers were opening. My job title, if you want it precisely, was overnight producer, which sounds like a person with a staff. In practice, it meant I answered the phones, queued the beds, screened the callers, fixed the levels, made the tea, chased the mice out of Studio 2 with a mop handle, and wrote the running order on index cards because the software crashed if you asked it to do anything except exist. I loved it. This is the part where I'm supposed to be embarrassed, and I have decided not to be. I loved the building at 2 in the morning. I loved the sound of rain on the studio glass, which is different from the sound of rain on a window in a house, because the studio glass is double and thick and turns rain into something distant and enormous, like weather happening to someone else. I loved the river foghorn, which went off at unreliable intervals, and which we had all agreed to pretend was intentional atmosphere. And I loved the show. The show was called The Long Way Home, 1 in the morning to 4. 3 hours of music and callers and a woman's voice. And if you have never been awake at that hour with the radio on, I cannot properly explain what that voice is for. It is not for information. It is for the specific loneliness of being awake while a city sleeps. The taxi drivers, the night nurses, the bakers, the people who have just been left, the people who cannot stop thinking about a phone call they need to make at 9. Delia Roux hosted it. I should tell you how she got there, because it is the only interesting business decision anyone has made in Halloway in a decade. 11 months before that anniversary night, Radio Halloway was 3 weeks from being switched off. The owner had died, the estate wanted it gone, and a national outfit called Corvid Audio had offered exactly enough to make everyone feel bad and no one feel rich. We were told to expect an email. Instead, a woman walked into the lobby on a Tuesday in her 30s, in an oxblood leather jacket over a charcoal turtleneck, with a pair of scuffed silver and black studio headphones around her neck, as if she had walked out of a building somewhere else and forgotten to put them down. And she asked Peg who she needed to speak to about buying it. Peg, who is 68 and has been the overnight engineer since the station's second decade, said, "Buying what, love?" And the woman said, "All of it." Her name was Delia Roux. She was 38. She was tall in a way that made low doorways look badly designed. With deep brown skin and long, heavy black hair she wore loose, which I mention because every powerful woman I had ever met wore her hair pinned up like a threat. And Delia did not seem interested in threatening anybody. Her eyes were a dark amber brown and extremely steady. She had a thin silver ring on her right thumb. She bought the station with the money from a life I did not know about yet, and she kept every member of staff, which was 4 people, and she gave herself the worst shift in radio, which is 1 to 4 in the morning, and she has never once in my hearing explained why. Here's what I knew about her in the first 6 months. She drank water, never coffee, out of a heavy green glass tumbler she brought from home, and she did not eat before a show. She wrote her running order by hand on index cards, in small square capitals, and she wrote a new set every night even when the software would have repeated the old one. She wore the headphones on one ear only, always the left, so that one ear stayed in the room with you. She pressed her thumb flat to the volume fader for a second before she spoke, every single time, like a person touching a doorframe on the way out of a house. And she signed off the same way every night, at 3:57, in a voice you could have poured over a burn. "Take the long way home. Steady now." 6 months of that. 6 months of me in the producer's booth on the other side of the glass, cueing her, timing her, laughing at things she said that were not jokes, and being, this is the honest part, completely, catastrophically unable to have a normal conversation with her about anything that was not a running order. Marnie noticed in week 2. Marnie is 19, does 2 nights a week for college credit, has opinions about everything, and possesses the emotional subtlety of a car alarm. "You do a thing with your face," she said. "I don't do a thing with my face." "When she comes up the stairs, you do a thing with your face." "That's the stairs," I said. "Those stairs are steep. That's a stairs face. The last thing you need for the anniversary night is Kit." Kit Vassar and I were together for 2 years, from 21 to 23, and she left in the tidiest way a person can leave. No shouting, no cheating, as far as I know, which is somehow worse, because it means she simply thought about it and decided. She sat on the end of the bed with her coat already on and told me she felt like she was waiting for me to start my life. And she had realized she did not want to be there when it happened, because she was fairly sure it was not going to. 3 months after that, my mother died. I am going to say that plainly, and then keep moving, because that is how I handled it at the time, and I would like to be honest about the shape of me in this story. My mother drove a delivery route for a bakery chain for 19 years, left the house at 3 in the morning, and she is the reason I know that the radio at that hour is a kind of company. She recorded me a cassette when I was 15, in the way that people used to, with the songs she played on her route, and she wrote on the paper insert in blue biro, "Songs for driving home, for Juno. When you're old enough to drive." I never learned to drive. I kept the tape. So, 24 ex-girlfriend, dead mother, night job at a dying station, and a boss I could not look at directly, like an eclipse. And then Corvid Audio came back. They came back in October, in an envelope with a matte finish, which is how you can tell money is involved. Corvid Audio owns 11 stations across the country, and a great deal of what you hear in a taxi. Their offer was simple, and it was not even insulting. They would buy Radio Halloway, keep the frequency, keep the name on paper, keep the daytime local presenters for a year, and replace the hours between midnight and 6 with a syndicated overnight feed produced in a city 400 miles away by 3 people and a scheduling system. They needed an answer in 6 weeks. Peg read the letter twice and said, "So they want the wires and not the house." Delia read it once, put it face down on the desk, pressed her thumb to it exactly the way she pressed her thumb to a fader and said, "We'll show them the house." That is what the anniversary night was. 40 years of Radio Holloway, open building, doors unlocked from 7, tours of the studios, the archive tapes playing in the lobby, the sheet cake with the broken 4. Delia's argument, made in a room with a leaking radiator to a woman from the council and 2 people from a licensing board, was that a local overnight is not content. It is infrastructure. It is the only thing in this city that is awake and answering at 3 in the morning that is not an emergency service. She said that sentence to me first, actually, at 2:30 on a Thursday, with her thumb on the fader, in the second before the mic went live. She said it like she was testing whether it could hold weight. I said, "That's the whole argument," she said. "Is it?" I said, "It's the only argument. Everything else is nostalgia, and nostalgia doesn't buy transmitters." She looked at me through the glass for slightly too long. Then she pressed the fader and told the city it was 2:31 and raining. The party was a catastrophe in the ordinary way parties are. 60 people, 11-person building. Peg had made an urn of tea, and someone's husband had brought wine in a cool box. So half the room was drinking tea, and the other half was drinking warm white wine out of paper cups, and both groups were judging each other. The archive tapes were playing in the lobby, a 1996 phone-in about a swan that had settled on the ring road, 40 solid minutes of Holloway residents ringing in with strong feelings about a swan. Marnie kept walking past me saying, "They loved that swan, Juno. They really loved it." I was wearing the good cardigan, which is mustard and white, and striped, and which Marnie describes as my beekeeper era. My hair was doing the thing it does in humidity, which is remembering it used to be dyed. I had a paper cup of tea I was not drinking, because I had been holding it for 40 minutes as a personality. At 9:10, the front door opened and Kit came in out of the rain. She was with 2 people in good coats. She shook the rain off her sleeve, looked around the lobby the way you look at a room you are pricing, and I watched her clock the swan tape, the urn, the sheet cake, and me, in that order. Kit Vassar worked for Corvid Audio. Acquisitions. Of course she did. There is a specific physical sensation that goes with seeing someone you used to sleep beside walk into your workplace wearing a lanyard from a company that is trying to switch your workplace off. It sits in the back of the throat under the jaw. I have looked for a word for it. The nearest I have got is the feeling of hearing your own name pronounced correctly by a stranger. She came straight over. She was pleased to see me. That was the trouble. Kit is not cruel. Kit has never been cruel. Kit is simply certain, and certainty at close range does more damage than cruelty ever has. Juno, a hand on my arm, warm. Look at you. You're still here. I'm still here? No, that's lovely, she said. It is. It's lovely. She asked what I was doing now, and I said producing, and she said, producing what? And I said the overnight, and she said, the 1 to 4 with her head tilted, and I said yes, and she said the thing. She said, it's so nice that you found something small to be good at. I want to be fair to her, because I have had a year to be unfair in private. I do not think she planned it. I think it came out of her the way water comes out of a cracked pipe you have been meaning to look at. And it landed, and behind her the 60 people carried on with the swan. And Peg looked over from the urn. And I felt the whole building shrink to the size of a lobby with a broken cake in it. And I heard myself say, I'm seeing someone actually. Reader, nobody had asked. Kit's face did the small, bright reorganization of a person deciding to be delighted. Oh, Juno, that's brilliant. Who? Here are the options I had, in the 2 seconds available. 1. Name a fictional person. Fatal. Kit has met everyone I have ever known and would have asked for a surname. 2. Say it was private. Correct answer. The adult answer. The answer I will be workshopping in the shower for the rest of my life. 3. Turn around. I turned around. Delia was 3 feet behind me, because Delia was always 3 feet behind me at that party, moving counselors gently towards the studio door like a woman herding weather. She had a glass of water. The headphones were around her neck at a party in a building full of strangers, because I do not think she owns a neck without them. She had heard all of it. I could tell from the stillness. Delia's stillness had gradations, and this was the deepest one. Kit looked at her. Kit's eyebrows went up 0.5 millimeter. And I watched my ex-girlfriend recognize the woman from the acquisition file, the buyer, the obstacle, the reason her Tuesday had a meeting in it. And I watched her decide out loud in the way certain people decide things. Her? Not cruelly, just her? And that, honestly, is the sound that did it. Not what Kit said about me. What Kit's voice did on the word her. I said, yes. And then I did a thing I have gone over so many times it has worn smooth like a stone in a pocket. I reached up and I put my hand on the collar of Delia Roux' leather jacket, and I kissed her in a lobby, in front of 60 people, 3 licensing officials, and the Swan. I need to slow down here because the next 4 seconds are the reason this story exists. The kiss I intended was a punctuation mark. Quick, closed, unarguable, over. The kind of kiss you perform for a room, which is not really a kiss at all, but a piece of stagecraft that borrows the shape of one. That is not what happened. What happened is that Delia's hand came up and settled at my jaw. Not pulling, not holding, just there, warm, the thumb resting exactly under my ear. And she did not step back. She stayed. She stayed for 1 second, and then a second one, and by the third, I had stopped performing and my paper cup was tilting, and by the fourth, the sound in the lobby had changed shape entirely, and somewhere behind us, Marnie said, "Oh," in a voice that will be played at my funeral. When she let me go, she did it in one clean movement. She looked at me for a moment with an expression I could not read at all. Then she looked past my shoulder, at the open studio door, at Studio 1, where the desk was leaved for the anniversary broadcast, where the faulty red bulb was buzzing over the glass, the bulb she had asked me to replace in March, which I had not replaced in March because it worked if you hit the wall. The lobby mic was open. It had been open since 8, feeding the party into the anniversary program. 40 years of Radio Halloway, live and local. Delia said, "Mic's still open." 60 people in the lobby. Somewhere between 4,000 and 11,000 people awake in Halloway at 9:10 on a wet Thursday, some fraction of them with the radio on. And a 4-second silence in the middle of a live broadcast, which anybody who works in radio will tell you is not a silence at all. A 4-second gap on air is a room. People walk into it, they put their own furniture in it. Peg reached over the lobby desk without hurrying and slid the fader down. Peg has been doing this since before I was born. She did it the way you would take a knife out of a toddler's hand. Then she said to nobody, "Well, that's the anniversary sorted."
If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe so the next one can find you. Stay close.
I would like to tell you, I handled the next 10 minutes with poise. I went into the back corridor by the archive shelves and stood facing a rack of 1/4-inch tapes from 1987 and did a breathing exercise I had learned from an app I had deleted. Marnie found me there and said, with the awe of a young person witnessing a car crash from a safe distance, "That's going to be on the internet." "It's radio, Marnie." "Juno, it's audio," she said. "Audio goes on the internet. Audio is the internet's favorite thing. There is no picture, so people will make the picture." She was correct, which was intolerable. Then the corridor light changed because someone was standing in it, and Delia said, "Juno," just the name. She used names like punctuation. She was extremely economical with them, which meant that when she spent one, you felt it. I turned around with my whole face on fire and said, "I am so sorry." "For which part?" "All of the parts. Sequentially. I'll start at the beginning and work forward. And if you want to fire me, I'd like to say in advance that it's fair. And also that I'd like to keep working until the 6 weeks are up, because the argument about the overnight is a good argument, and it shouldn't lose because I'm an idiot in a lobby." Delia listened to the entire speech without moving. Then she said, "Are you finished?" "Almost certainly not." She looked at the tape rack behind me for a second, and then she said, "I'm not going to fire you for kissing me, Juno. That would be an extraordinary thing to do to someone." "Right. I am going to ask you one question, and I want you to answer it properly, because there are 3 people from a licensing board in my lobby, and one of them has a phone." "Okay," she said. "Do you want me to tell them it was a joke?" And here's where I would like to report that I said yes. What I said was, "Do you want to?" Delia's mouth did something at the corner, not a smile. a single millimeter of movement that I would spend the next several weeks cataloging like a person pressing flowers. That isn't an answer, she said. It's the only one I've got that's true. She considered me. Behind her, in the lobby, someone laughed at the swan. Then I'm going to say nothing, she said. Saying nothing is not a lie. If they ask, I'll tell them we don't discuss the private lives of staff, which happens to be a policy I wrote this morning. You wrote that this morning? I write a lot of policies, said Delia Roux, and went back to the room. I lived above the station. I've been putting off telling you that, and I do not entirely know why, except that in the retelling, it sounds like a plot device, and at the time it was simply rent. When Delia bought the building, she inherited the flat on the top floor, which had been the previous owner's office, and then his son's, and then nobody's. And she had it cleaned and put a note on the staff board offering it at a number that I read 3 times because I assumed I had misread it. I took it in April. 2 rooms and a slanted ceiling and a window over Farrier Street where, if you leaned, you could see one bridge. Delia lived on the floor below, which is how, at 4 in the morning on the day after the anniversary, we came up the same stairwell in the same silence, and she stopped on her landing and I kept going to mine. And neither of us said anything at all, and I lay on top of my bed in the good cardigan and listened to the building tick. At 8:30, my phone woke me up 11 times in a row. Marnie was right. Marnie is always right, which is the least attractive thing about her. Somebody had clipped it. 22 seconds. A woman's voice saying, "It's so nice that you found something small to be good at." A pause. Then rustling. Then 4 seconds of the particular sound that people cannot stop listening to. And then a low, unhurried voice saying, "Mic's still open." By noon, it had been posted with 16 captions. By evening, a local news site had written 400 words under the headline, "Holloway Station's 40th goes off script." By the next morning, the clip existed in a version with a swan sound effect edited underneath it, which I consider the single greatest artistic achievement in the history of this city. Peg printed the news article out. Peg prints things out. She put it on the fridge in the kitchenette next to a rota from 2019 and said, "Best numbers we've had at 9 at night in 4 years, love." That's grim. That's radio, said Peg. The other consequence arrived at 11, by email from Kit. It was a good email. That is the thing about Kit. She has never sent a bad email in her life. She said she was sorry if she had been clumsy. She said she had not known. She said, and here is where the email turned into a business document without changing its tone at all, that what had happened was actually a fascinating illustration of the point Corvid had been trying to make, which is that the value in Radio Holloway is personalities, not hours, and that Corvid would be very interested in discussing a model where the overnight became a syndicated feed, but Delia and I fronted a weekly show that could travel across all 11 stations. She used the phrase "the human angle." She used the phrase, obviously with the chemistry evidenced. I read it 4 times. Then I went downstairs at 11 at night and put it on the desk in front of Delia, who was writing her running order on index cards in small square capitals with a black biro. She read it once. She turned the phone face down. She said, "No, I haven't asked you anything. You were going to ask if it saves the station," she said. "It doesn't. It saves us. That's a different product." We had the conversation at 10 past midnight in Studio 1 with the lights half off, which is how the room lives when nothing is live yet. 1 lamp on the desk, the fader wall glowing, the faulty red bulb dark and innocent above the door. She sat on the edge of the desk. I sat in the producer's chair with my feet up on the crate of cables I had been meaning to sort since April. Delia said, "I want to be straightforward with you, and I'd like you to let me finish because I've been rehearsing this since 4 in the morning, and if you interrupt me, I'll lose it." "You rehearsed it?" "I rehearse everything, Juno. That's the job." She turned the green glass tumbler a quarter turn on the desk. "Water. Always. Never coffee. Before a show." "Yesterday, in the lobby," she said. "That was yours. You did it, and I understood why the moment you did it, and I'm not going to make you carry it around like a crime." Her thumb moved once across the rim of the glass. "But what happened afterwards was mine. You kissed me for 1 second, I kissed you for 3. Those are different acts, and I'm not going to pretend they're the same one." The building ticked. Out on Farrier Street, a taxi went past with its window down. Right, I said, in the voice of a woman being read a diagnosis. So here's the situation as it actually stands, Delia said. I sign your hours. I own your front door. In 6 weeks, I may also be the person who takes your job away from you by signing a piece of paper in a room you're not in. She looked at me directly. So nothing is going to happen between us while all three of those things are true. Not because I don't want it to. Because you'd never be able to tell which parts of yourself you were giving away, and I'd never be able to tell what I'd taken. I did not have anything. I had absolutely nothing. I said, okay. Delia said, okay. And it should have ended there. And if she had been a smaller person, it would have. Instead, she opened the desk drawer, took out an envelope, and put it in my hands. Inside was a tenancy agreement. 3 years, fixed in my name, at the rent I was already paying, drawn up by a solicitor on Bridge Street, and signed by her that afternoon. And clipped to it, a 1-page memo to the staff board, dated the same day, moving line management of the overnight producer from the station owner to the chief engineer, to Peg. You can't sack me, I said slowly. And you can't evict me. Correct. You did that in 1 working day. I made a phone call at 9 and another at 10. She stood up off the desk and picked up her cards. Now neither of us has to wonder. Then she pressed her thumb to the fader, and it was 1 a.m, and she told the city that it was raining and had been raining, and that we would take the long way home together. Here is a thing I have never said out loud to anybody. I sat in the producer's booth for that entire show with the envelope in my lap, and at some point around 2, I stopped being able to see the levels properly, and I had to take my glasses off and press the heels of my hands against my eyes. Because in 2 years, Kit had never once removed a single obstacle from my life. Kit had loved me, I do not doubt that. But loving me had mostly involved commenting on the obstacles. And a woman who was not allowed to want me had, in 1 working day, quietly taken away every piece of power she had over me and handed it to a 68-year-old engineer with a tea flask. At 3:10, the phone lit up in the booth. It always lit up at 3:10. Long way home, I said, sniffing, wildly unprofessional. You're through. You all right, Duck? Said Gull. Gull is not his real name. Gull is what Delia started calling him on air in her 2nd month, because he rang every night at 3:10 from a bakery on the north side where he was the only person on the ovens. And the first time he ever got through, he said, "There's a gull on the roof been screaming at me for an hour. Can you play something louder than a gull?" He rang every night after that, every night for 11 months. He requested the same song roughly 1 week in 3, which Delia always played and never remarked on. He gave weather reports from the bakery yard. He gave running commentary on the gull, which he insisted was the same gull. He was, in the estimation of everyone at Radio Halloway, the single most valuable asset we had. And Corvid Audio's model did not have a phone line in it at all. "I'm fine," I told him. "Long night?" "Heard the anniversary," said Gull. "Everybody heard the anniversary, Gull." "Aye," he said comfortably. "Nice, though, wasn't it?" I did not sleep that day either. I lay in the flat above the studio with the window open to the rain and did the arithmetic I had been avoiding, which went like this. 6 weeks until the decision. 3 feet, the distance she stood behind me at that party, all night, without once being asked to. 4 seconds, the difference between a lie and a fact. 11 months, how long a woman had been hosting the worst shift in radio in a city with 2 bridges, for reasons she had never explained to anybody. And 1 working day, how long it had taken her to make sure that if I ever came near her again, it would be because I chose to, and not because she was standing between me and the door. The first week after passed in the strange suspended quiet of 2 people being extremely polite in a building with 1 staircase. We did the show. We did it well, actually. Better than well, because we had, for the first time in the history of Radio Halloway, an audience that had heard of us. The clip brought people to the 1 o'clock. Not many. Radio numbers are small and honest, and nobody in this story becomes famous. But the phone lines lit up more than twice a night, and Peg started keeping a tally on the whiteboard, and the tally became the campaign. That was Delia's plan, and it was a good one. If Corvid's argument was that overnight hours could be produced anywhere, then we would spend 6 weeks proving that this overnight could not. So every night at 2:30, she opened the lines and asked one question. Tell me where you are and why you're awake. And Holloway told us, a woman on a ward at St. Cuthbert's who took her break at 2:30 and could not have the radio on the ward, so she took it in the corridor with one earbud. A man who drove the gritting lorry in winter and washed windows the rest of the year. A 20-year-old on a night shift at a fulfillment warehouse out by the Ring Road, who said the overnight was the only 3 hours of the day where anyone talked to him like he was in the room. 2 taxi drivers who called to argue with each other about a bridge closure and stayed on the line for 11 minutes. Peg recorded all of it. I cut it. We had 41 hours of tape by the end of the second week, and a licensing hearing in 4. And every night at 3:57 the same sign-off. Take the long way home. Steady now. Here is what I cataloged in those weeks, since I could not do anything else. The thumb on the fader first. Always a second before she spoke, flat against the plastic. And I began to notice it happened on other surfaces too. The door frame, the edge of the desk, the roof of a taxi. A person steadying an object that did not need steadying. The headphones on the left ear only, never both. I understood it eventually, the way you understand a habit by watching it fail. One night, the studio phone rang and she reached for it with both cans on by mistake, and she flinched hard at her own deafness on that side and pulled them off and did not put them back on for 6 minutes. The green glass tumbler, water, never coffee, nothing to eat before the show, ever. And afterwards, always the same thing. One orange, peeled in a single unbroken piece during the last song. The peel left in a spiral on the desk like a small piece of evidence. The index cards, in small square capitals. And the fact that she was, in the most ordinary way, kind, not soft, not warm, kind, which is a different mechanism. She held doors without appearing to notice doors. She remembered that Marnie's college deadline was on the 9th and moved her shift. She never raised her voice. Not once. Not even the night the transmitter tripped and we were off air for 6 minutes and Peg swore in a way I did not know a person could swear. I would have said before that autumn that I knew what wanting somebody felt like. What I had not known was how much of it is administrative. It is a filing problem. You accumulate details you have nowhere to put.
You've got it
bad, said Marnie on a Tuesday, eating crisps she had not asked for. I've got it managed. You wrote her running order on your own cards. I write everybody's. You wrote it in her handwriting, Juno. She held up a card. My capitals had gone small and square. That's a cry for help. I learned about Delia's other life from Peg, in the kitchenette, at 4 a.m, over the last of the tea. I had asked something stupid and casual about why a person with money buys a station in Holloway. And Peg looked at me over her glasses for a while and then said, "You really don't know." Know what? What she did before. She had a job, I said. In audio. She said, in audio. Peg laughed, one note. Then she went to the archive shelf, put her hand on it without looking, and pulled out a CD in a paper sleeve, which is how you know a person has worked somewhere for 30 years. Corvid ran a national late show for 9 years, she said. 1 till 4, every night. Biggest overnight audience in the country. Presented by a woman who never used her surname on air. She put it in the kitchen player, and out came a voice I would have known through a wall, 6 years younger, saying it was 2:10 and cold everywhere. She was the reason people bought radios, Peg said. And then in the spring of the year before last, she walked out mid-contract and never went back. And Corvid put out a line about creative differences, and that was that. Why? And Peg, who does not gossip and who names things exactly once, said, "That's hers to tell you, love. But I'll say this. She didn't leave because they were cruel to her. She rinsed her cup. She left because of what they did to a caller. I did not ask her about it. I want that on the record because I spent 3 days deciding not to, and it was the hardest work I did that month. Instead, I asked her about the orange. It was a Thursday 4:30, and we were walking back up Farrier Street from the all-night garage because the studio kettle had died and Peg had declared the situation an emergency. It was raining in the fine sideways way that soaks you slowly out of politeness. "Why an orange?" I said. "Every night, the last song. 1 orange." Delia looked genuinely thrown. which almost never happened, and I discovered that catching her off guard produced a physical sensation in me like a lift dropping. You notice that? I notice everything, I said. It's a personality disorder, not a skill. She walked a few steps. Then, my grandmother sold fruit off a barrow in Ridley Market for 30 years. She used to say you can tell what kind of night a person's had by whether they can be bothered to peel something. A pause. I don't eat before a show because I sound different on a full stomach. So the orange is the first thing. That's all it is. It's not romantic. It's slightly romantic. It's fruit, Juno. It's a spiral, I said. You leave it in a spiral. Every night. On a desk in a building nobody looks at. That's not fruit. That's a signature. Delia stopped walking. We were under the awning of the shut bakery, and the rain was coming off the edge of it in a line. And she looked at me for a moment with the expression she had used in the corridor by the tapes. She said, "You're going to be a problem." I said, "I've been a problem since April." And she laughed. Not a big laugh. 2 notes, low, entirely involuntary. And the sound went through the middle of me like a hand pressed flat on a bruise. And then she started walking again and said, 6 weeks. And I said, 4 now. And she said 4. And neither of us said anything else until Farrier Street. The nights piled up. On the 11th night after the anniversary, the licensing officer sent Delia a list of questions, and one of them was about the phone lines. And she was on hold with a regulator for 90 minutes and did the whole show on 4 hours of sleep. And I brought her the tumbler filled without being asked. And she looked at it for a second too long and said, "Thank you," in a voice with something loose in it. On the 14th night, the foghorn went off 9 times in a row, and we abandoned the running order and did an hour on the river. On the 16th, Gull's Gull got into the bakery. That is the whole story. It was on air for 20 minutes, and it is, to this day, the single most requested item in the archive. On the 18th night, I told her about my mother. I had not planned to. We were doing a bit on air about music people associate with driving. And after the show, in the half-dark with the desk lamp on, Delia said, "You didn't say anything on the microphone tonight." Which was true. I do not go on air. I have a voice for radio and a temperament for the room behind it. And I said, "My mom drove a bakery route. 3 in the morning, 19 years. She listened to whatever was on. And then, because it was 4 in the morning, which is the hour that unlocks people, I told her about the tape. Songs for driving home, Blue Biro, for Juno, when you're old enough to drive." "I never learned to drive," I said, "so it's just a tape, in a box, of a woman's driving music for a person who doesn't drive." I laughed at myself badly. Anyway, that's why I like the hour. It's her hour. That's the whole reason I'm good at this, which is a bit embarrassing when you put it out loud, because it means my entire career is a haunting. Delia was quiet for a long moment. Then she took the headphones from around her neck and she held them out, not to give them to me, but so that the left cup faced me and the right faced her. The way you split a pair with somebody in a room where only one person is allowed to be listening. She said, "Play me one." I have thought about that gesture more than I have thought about the kiss. She never wore both ears. She kept one in the room with you, always. And I had assumed for months that it was a technical habit. Talk back, cue, the discipline of a presenter who has to hear a producer count her down. It was not. I found out later, and I will tell you when I get there. But that night I did not know, and so what I understood was only this. She had one ear for the show and one ear for the room, and she was offering me the ear that belonged to the room. We sat on the floor of Studio One with our backs against the desk, and our shoulders not touching, 3 inches of air between us, and we listened to my dead mother's cassette on a machine from 1994, because I did not own anything that could play it, and Radio Halloway owned everything. Track 2 was a song about a bus. Delia said, "Your mother had excellent taste and one very strange laugh." And I laughed so hard, I had to put my hand over my mouth in a room built to keep sound in. At 4:30 in the morning, and when I took my hand away, she was watching me with an expression I finally recognized, because I had been wearing it myself for 6 months, in the reflection of a fader wall. Neither of us moved. 3 inches. "Steady now," she said to herself, and stood up and went downstairs to her flat, and I went upstairs to mine. 12 days before the hearing, the power went out on Farrier Street. It went out at 10 to 1, in the middle of the worst storm Halloway had had in 6 years. The kind where the river comes up over the low path, and the buses stop and the whole city has an opinion about it in the morning. The lights went, the desk went, the air conditioning that had been failing since August stopped failing loudly and started failing silently, and the building was suddenly darker and older, and much more itself. Then the generator kicked in downstairs with a sound like a cough, and Peg came up the stairs with a torch under her chin and said the 6 most beautiful words in broadcasting. "Transmitter's up, you've got 1 lamp." I want you to understand what that show was, because I have worked in radio for 3 years now, and I have not had another one like it. 1 desk lamp, 2 microphones, a generator that could carry the transmitter and the phones and nothing else, which meant no screens, no automation, no playout system, just the emergency CD stack, the archive shelf, and a woman with a torch and an index card. Delia pressed her thumb to a fader she could barely see and said, "Good morning. It's 1 o'clock, the lights are out on this side of the river, and we are running on a generator in a brick building on Farrier Street. So this is going to be a strange one, and I'd like you to stay." The lines lit up before she finished the sentence. Everybody was awake. That is what a power cut does. It puts a whole city in the same hour. We had a man on the Barrow estate describing his street by the light of his phone. We had the night nurse from St. Cuthbert's, whose hospital had switched to its own generators, saying calmly that everything there was fine, and please stop ringing the ward. We had a woman who had been in labor for 9 hours ring us from a corridor to say that her partner had gone to move the car, and she wanted somebody to talk to. Delia talked to her for 4 minutes. She did not put on a voice. She asked what the corridor looked like. At 3:10, Gull rang. "Bakery's dark," he said. "Ovens are gone. 200 loaves ruined." "I'm sorry," said Delia. Well, a pause with rain in it. "Gull's still there, though. On the roof. In this. Persistent bird." "Loyal bird," said Gull, and I put my head down on the desk in the booth and laughed until my ribs hurt. We ran 2 hours past the end of the show. Peg woke up the breakfast presenter at 5 and told him to stay in bed. When the lights came back on at 20 past 6, the entire desk lit up at once and Delia flinched away from it like a woman coming out of a cinema in the afternoon. She said, on air, blinking, "Well, there it is." Then she said, "Take the long way home. Steady now. You've reached the part where wanting turns into something more. If you want the hotter uncensored GL scenes, they're on my Patreon, GL After Hours. Details in the description." Now, back to Juno, who was about to discover that a staircase can be the longest distance in a building. We closed the studio at 6:30 in the morning. Peg went home. Marnie had not been in. It was not her night, and she has never forgiven the storm for it. The building smelled of rain on hot dust, which is the actual smell of that place, and always will be. And the corridor by the archive was still dark, because the corridor light had never worked properly since 1998. We went up the stairs together in the ordinary way. And on her landing, Delia stopped the way she always stopped, and I kept going, the way I always kept going. And she said, "Juno," just the name, punctuation. I stopped on the 4th step above her landing, which put us at eye level for the first time in 6 months. And it turns out that was the entire problem, because at eye level I could see that her hands were not steady and had not been for some time. "2 of the 3 are gone," she said. "I know. You could have moved out. Anyone sensible would have moved out." "I like the flat," I said. "There's a bit where you can see the bridge." "There's a bit where you can see a bridge," Delia agreed, "if you lean out of the window far enough to die. It's a very good bridge." She looked at me. The headphones were around her neck. Her hair was wet at the ends from the walk to the generator housing, and there was a peel spiral on the desk downstairs that nobody had cleared away. She said, 12 days, then the hearing, and then a decision, and then either this place carries on or it doesn't. And either way, you're free of me on paper, and I'd like you to be free of me, in fact, so that when you decide what you want, you'll be able to trust the answer. Delia, that's what I'm proposing. Delia, I said, I've been deciding since April. And that was it. That was the whole architecture of 6 months, and it came down in the amount of time it takes to say a name twice. She came up one step. She put her hand at my jaw, the same way she had in the lobby, thumb resting under my ear, except this time nobody was watching, and there was no microphone in the building that was on. And she kissed me on a staircase at 20 to 7 in the morning, while the rain came off the roof of a shut bakery 2 streets away. It was not a 4-second kiss. I'm not going to describe it further than that because some things are yours, and this one is mine. Afterwards, she rested her forehead against mine and said, "That was not sensible." "No? 12 days," she said again, but it had stopped being a rule and started being a countdown, which is a completely different piece of arithmetic. Here is what the 12 days were actually like, since you can probably guess, and I would rather tell you. They were the best days I have had. Nothing happened, in the sense that people mean when they say nothing happened. And everything happened, in the sense of 2 people in a building at 4 in the morning who have agreed on a date. She brought me the tumbler once, filled without being asked, and set it down at my elbow and left her hand flat on the desk beside it for a second longer than the action required. I started cutting the tape for the hearing at the desk in her office instead of mine, because the chair was better, which was a lie, and she let me tell it. On the 4th day, she came in with 2 oranges. She did not say anything about it. She put one on the shelf above my monitor before the show, and peeled hers at the last song. And at 4 in the morning, I peeled mine, badly, in 11 pieces. And she looked at the pile on my desk and said, "That's the worst thing I've ever seen a person do to fruit. And I have never in my life been happier." On the 6th day, Kit rang me. I let it go to voicemail, then listened at 4 in the morning with the lights off, which is a bad habit I would recommend to nobody. Kit was kind again. She said she wanted to give me a heads up as a friend, out of courtesy. Before the hearing, she said the licensing panel had asked Corvid for evidence of the station's editorial standards, and Corvid had submitted a package, and the package included the anniversary broadcast. She said, "It's just processed, Juno. Don't read anything into it." She said, "Obviously the 4 seconds are in it." She said, "You should think about the human angle offer, honestly. Whatever happens to the building, you'd both be fine." And then, at the end, in a different voice, the one she used to decomdi, in a kitchen at 10:30 at night, she said, "I did mean it, you know, that I was glad you'd found something. I'm sorry it came out the way it did." I sat with the phone in my lap for a long time. Then I went downstairs and told Delia, because I had learned something in the previous month about the difference between protecting a person and managing them, and I had decided which one I was going to be. Delia listened to the voicemail with her elbows on the desk and her chin on her folded hands, and when it finished, she did not move for about 10 seconds. Then she said, "Right," and it was the first time I'd ever heard her voice arrive somewhere before she did. "They're allowed to submit it?" "They're allowed to submit anything." She turned the tumbler a quarter turn. "It won't work. A panel won't kill a license over 4 seconds of 2 adults at a party." A pause. "That isn't what it's for." "Then what's it for?" And Delia Roux, who had not explained herself to anybody in Holloway in 11 months, said, "Sit down. I'm going to tell you about the last caller I had on the national show." Her name was June. That was her real name. Delia used it on air because June asked her to. She rang the National Late Show for the first time on a Tuesday in February at 3:10 from a kitchen in a town Delia never named. She was 51. Her husband had gone in the autumn. Her son was at sea 8 months of the year, and she had discovered, as many people do, that the thing about grief is not the crying. It is the 11 hours between 3 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon when there is nobody to say a sentence to. She rang most weeks for a year and a half. Sometimes she talked about the weather. Once she read out a recipe. Delia knew the sound of her breath before she spoke. And in the spring, on one particular night, June rang and could not do the small talk and said out loud on national radio exactly how bad it was. Not dangerously, not frighteningly, just honestly, in the plain words of a woman describing a kitchen at 3 in the morning. And Delia stayed with her for 9 minutes and then played her a song. And afterwards, the show's producer said it was the best broadcasting he had heard in his career. And he was right, and that is the problem. Because the network's promotions department heard it too. They cut it to 40 seconds. They put music underneath it. They put it out as a trailer across 11 stations all week for a campaign about how the network was there for you at 3 in the morning. They did it without asking, because the release form at the top of the call gave them the right, and because nobody in that department had ever spoken to a person at 3 in the morning in their lives. June worked as a school cook. Somebody in her town recognized the voice. She stopped ringing. Delia found out 4 months later, from a colleague, that June had left the job and moved to her sister's on the other side of the country. And that was all anyone knew. And that is all anyone will ever know. Because Delia never tried to find her. I asked them to pull it, Delia said. Twice. In writing. It tested extremely well, so they didn't. She turned the tumbler back. I walked out with 2 years left on the contract. They kept my fee. I signed a piece of paper that says I won't say why, and I have just said why. So there's that. The building ticked. I said, "That's why you don't wear both ears." She looked up. "You keep one out of the show," I said. "Always the left? You never let the desk be the only thing you can hear." Delia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I had both cans on when they played it. I was in a studio in a different city, and it went out and I didn't hear it happen. Everyone in the country heard it, and I was the one person in a soundproof room." Her thumb moved on the glass. "So no, I don't do that anymore. 1 ear for the show, 1 ear for the room." 2 things happened in the next 4 days, and I found out about the second one from a photocopier. The first was the hearing, which was held in a council building with a leaking radiator on a Wednesday afternoon, and which was, in the way of these things, extremely boring and completely devastating. We played 11 minutes of Holloway, the night nurse, the gritting Lori, the warehouse boy who said the overnight was the only 3 hours where anyone talked to him like he was in the room, 2 taxi drivers arguing about a bridge, a woman in labor in a corridor with her permission, obtained in writing twice by Delia, who would not have used 4 seconds of it otherwise. Then Corvid's counsel stood up and was perfectly reasonable for 25 minutes about reach, sustainability, and editorial standards, and played the anniversary broadcast, including the 4 seconds, and said the words, "an unmanaged environment." Kit sat in the second row and did not look at me once, which I understood better after the photocopier. The panel said it would report in 8 working days. The second thing was a term sheet. I found it on Friday because Peg had asked me to copy the archive inventory and the machine had jammed. And I opened the drawer, and there it was. 4 pages. Warm. Forgotten by somebody who never forgets anything. Corvid audio. Heads of terms. Private and confidential. Corvid would withdraw its objection. Radio Holloway would keep its license, its frequency, its staff, and, this was Clause 4, and I read it 3 times, a locally produced, locally hosted overnight service, contractually protected for 5 years, with a named phone line. And in exchange, Delia Roux would return to the network as the host of the National Late Show, 900 miles of contract, 2 years, with an option, non-compete. She could not present on any station she owned, which meant she would never say the word Holloway on the radio again. I found her in Studio 2 with the archive shelf pulled out, at 8 in the evening, 4 hours before a show, doing the thing she did when she was thinking, which was tidying 1/4-inch tape that nobody had touched since the Swan. I put the term sheet on the shelf in front of her. She looked at it. She did not perform surprise. That is one of the things I loved about her, and one of the reasons I nearly did not survive that week. "I was going to tell you on Sunday," she said. "Were you?" "Yes." "Before or after you signed it?" Delia straightened up. "Juno, it's a fair question. It's actually the whole question." "It's a good deal," she said. "It's the best deal that has ever been on this table. The station survives. Every job in the building survives. The overnight is protected for 5 years in writing, which is longer than this place has ever been safe in its entire history." Her voice did not rise. Her voice never rose. "There is one thing they want, and it's the only asset I have, and it happens to be a thing I can just hand over." They want you back so they can put you on the trailer, Delia. They want me back because I'm good at it. They want the sound of a woman being kind at 3 a.m, I said, so they can sell it in 40-second pieces to 11 cities, and you know that. Because you're the only person alive who's actually watched them do it. Silence. And you're going to give it to them, I said, for a building. Delia said, for your job. And there it was, in the middle of the room, like a piece of furniture nobody had asked for. Don't, I said. My voice was not steady, and I let it not be. Don't you dare make me the reason. You are not the reason. You are one of 4 people on a payroll. You put my tenancy in writing in 1 working day, I said. You moved your own name off my line management so that I could look at you honestly. You have spent 6 months making absolutely sure that nothing about me was ever leverage. And now you want to spend yourself on me and call it arithmetic. She turned away, one hand flat on the archive shelf. They will use you the way they used June, I said. Not because they're evil, because they're a machine. And that's what machines do with a person who's good at being kind. And in 2 years, you'll be in a soundproof room with both ears covered while they play something back that you never agreed to. And I will not. I stopped, because I had reached the end of what I could say and stay upright. Delia said quietly, say it. I said, I will not be the price of that. And then I went upstairs, and I did not go down for the show. And Peg produced it. And for the first time in 7 months, I lay in the flat above the studio with the radio off, and I could still hear her voice through the floor because the building is old and the floor is thin, and that, in case you have never had it, is what heartbreak actually sounds like. I did not go down for 2 nights. On the first night, I told myself it was dignity. On the second, I admitted it was cowardice, which is at least cheaper to maintain. Marnie came up on the second evening with crisps she had not asked for and sat on the end of my bed with the air of a young person conducting an intervention she had seen on television. So you love her, she said. Marnie. I'm just saying it out loud because you two have made an entire radio station listen to you not say it, and frankly, the building is tired. Peg came up an hour later. Peg did not sit down. Peg stood in the doorway with her cup and looked at the flat, the boxes I had never unpacked, the tape on the shelf, the window where you can see one bridge if you lean out far enough to die. She said, you know she's been 3 feet behind you since April. Peg, not being romantic, love, being literal. I've watched her do it. In a room, in a corridor, at that party. Peg drank her tea. I've worked with a lot of talent. Talent stands where the light is. That one stands where you are. Here is what I decided. At 4 a.m, in a flat above a studio, listening to a woman's voice come up through a floor. Delia's plan worked. That was the unbearable part. If she signed, the station lived, the phone line lived, 4 people kept their jobs, and the hour that belonged to my mother and to Gull and to the warehouse boy stayed local for 5 years. The only thing wrong with it was that it required her to hand a machine the exact thing the machine had already broken once, and to do it quietly, in a room nobody was in, with a piece of paper that had a confidentiality clause on page 1. So I did the only thing I have ever been good at. I put it on the radio. I want to be honest about the size of this. I am not a presenter. I have never wanted to be. I have a voice that is fine and a temperament for the room behind the glass. And in 3 years at Radio Halloway, I had spoken on air exactly twice, both times to say the word levels. At 3:20 a.m, on the 8th day, with the show running and Peg on the desk and the faulty red bulb buzzing over the door, I came into Studio 1, sat down at the second microphone, put my hand flat on the desk, and looked at Delia through nothing at all. She looked back at me for 2 full seconds. Then she pressed her thumb to the fader, the way she did before she spoke, every time, for 11 months, and she pushed it towards me. I said, my name's Juno Keane. I produce this show. You've never heard me, and that's on purpose, because I'm not a broadcaster. I'm the person who tells the broadcaster she's got 90 seconds left. My mom drove a bakery van in the city for 19 years, 3 a.m, out past the ring road, back by 7. She died 3 years ago in March. And the reason I'm here in this chair at 20 past 3 is that this hour is the only hour of the day that ever kept her company. And somebody local was always awake in it. And that turns out to be a thing you can't get anywhere else, no matter what the reach figures say. There's a decision being made about this station in the next few days. You'll have read that it's about money. It isn't. There is an offer on the table that saves this building, saves the jobs, and protects a local overnight with a real phone number for 5 years. It's a good offer. It's the best one we'll ever get. The price of it is that the woman sitting across from me has to go and work for the company, making the offer for 2 years, and never say the name of this city on the radio again. She was going to take it. She was going to take it quietly, so that nobody in this building would have to feel like they cost anything. I'd like everybody listening to know that's what's being bought. That's all. I'm not asking you to do anything. It's 20 past 3, and you're allowed to just be awake. Then I put my hand back in my lap, and Delia pressed her thumb to the fader and said, in the same voice she uses for the weather, "That was my producer. She's right about all of it. There's a song after this." And then the switchboard lit up like the front of a fairground. Nobody in this story becomes famous. I told you that at the start, and I meant it. What actually happened is that 406 people wrote to a licensing panel in 11 days, which, if you have never worked in local radio, is a number that does not happen. Peg counted them twice. The night nurse from St. Cuthbert's got her whole ward to sign one. The 2 taxi drivers wrote separately, and both mentioned the bridge. The warehouse boy wrote a page and a half in biro. Somebody sent in a photograph of a swan with no explanation whatsoever. Gull rang at 10 past 3 the next night and said, "You'll not like this. I've written a letter." "You've never written a letter in your life." "Aye, well," said Gull, "there's a first." And Corvid Audio withdrew. Not because they were shamed exactly. Because on the Friday, a trade website ran a piece with the headline, "Network offered to spare local station if star presenter returned." And a company whose entire brand is, "We're here for you at 3 in the morning" discovered it did not enjoy that sentence at all. The offer came off the table by lunchtime, along with a statement about mutual respect for the local sector. The panel granted the license 8 days later, 5 years, with a condition written into it about a locally produced overnight service and a working telephone line. Peg printed it out. It is on the fridge, next to the rota from 2019. Kit sent one last email. 2 lines. "That was a hell of a piece of radio. I hope you know I'd never have got you to do it." She was right, and I do not think she meant it unkindly, and I have not answered it. And I think about it perhaps twice a year now, which is the correct amount. Delia did not say anything to me for the whole of that show. We went up the stairs at 4:30 in the morning, and on her landing she stopped, the way she always stopped. Except this time she did not let me keep going. She said, "You gave away the only thing you're frightened of." Yes. On air, live, without telling me. "You'd have stopped me." "I would have stopped you," Delia agreed. Her hand was at my jaw again, thumb under my ear, and her voice, the one people bought radios for, had gone completely out of professional order. "Juno, I have spent 11 months making sure I never took a single thing from you." "I know. And you just handed me the whole city." "That's not what I did," I said. "I gave it back to you. It was never mine. I just knew where the microphone was." Delia Roux, who rehearses everything, did not appear to have anything prepared, so she kissed me on her own landing in a brick building on Ferrier Street at 25 to 5 in the morning, with the rain going and the generator off and nobody anywhere listening. 5 months later, the red bulb over the studio door is new. I replaced it myself on a Tuesday, on a stepladder badly, while Marnie filmed it for reasons she has never explained. It does not buzz anymore. It comes on steady, which took some getting used to. Peg said the silence made her uneasy for a fortnight. I still live in the building, not upstairs. The upstairs flat is now the tape library, because Peg won that argument in 11 seconds by pointing at a damp patch. I do a segment now, 10 minutes, twice a week at 2:30, called "Where Are You?", which is just the question Delia used to ask and people ringing in to answer it. I am not good at it yet. I am getting better. Delia produces me for it, which means she sits where I used to sit and holds up a card with the time left on it in small square capitals. And every so often she writes something on the card that is not the time, to see if she can break me. And twice she has. The lines still light up at 3:10. Gull has retired from the bakery and now rings from a flat with a view of a car park, where he reports there is a different Gull, and he suspects a family connection. And on Thursday nights, when the last song is running and the peel is in a spiral on the desk, my mother's tape sits on the shelf above the monitor where I put it in March. We played it once all the way through, on air, at 2 in the morning, and 11 people rang in with the same songs and their own routes in their own dead. And it was the most listened to hour in the recorded history of Radio Halloway, which is a small history, and which is the only one I want. Last night she signed off at 3:57 the way she has for 2 years. Take the long way home. Then she pressed her thumb flat to the fader and closed it, and took the headphones from around her neck and put the left cup into my hand, the ear she keeps for the room, and said, "Mic's still open." And this time, neither of us moved.